Deep within a massive underground facility, hidden from the world's prying eyes, a groundbreaking project was taking shape. The head scientist, pulling another late night at her desk, rubbed her tired eyes as she reviewed the latest test results. The gentle hum of powerful computers filled the room, their screens casting a soft blue glow across stacks of confidential papers. This wasn't just any military project. This was the nature-forged battleship, humanity's most ambitious attempt to control the very forces of nature itself. The scientist had spent the last 15 years of her life dedicated to this single goal, building a warship that could manipulate weather patterns. It sounded like something straight out of a science fiction movie, but here they were, making it reality. The facility itself was a marvel of engineering, stretching nearly 2 miles underground. Its walls, reinforced with layers of concrete and steel, housed some of the most advanced technology ever created. Walking through the corridors, you'd see teams of researchers hunched over specialized equipment, their faces reflecting both excitement and worry about what they were creating. But today felt different. The scientists noticed something odd in the latest sensor readings. The air pressure in the main chamber kept fluctuating, even though they hadn't activated any systems yet. At first, she thought it was just a glitch in the monitoring equipment. But when 3 different backup sensors showed the same readings, she knew something unusual was happening. She made her way down to the main chamber, her footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. The massive door slid open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing the true scale of their creation. The nature-forged battleship dominated the space, its dark hull stretching into the shadows. Even unfinished, it was an impressive sight. Strange patterns were etched across its surface, not for decoration, but complex arrays of weather manipulation technology that had taken years to perfect. As she approached the ship, she felt the air change. It became heavier, more charged, like the feeling just before a thunderstorm. Her tablet beeped with incoming data, showing wild swings in temperature and humidity around the vessel. This wasn't supposed to happen. The systems weren't even powered up yet. She quickly called the night shift team, and soon the quiet chamber was filled with the sound of urgent footsteps and voices. They began running diagnostics, checking every sensor and system they could access. The ship seemed to be affecting the environment around it somehow, all on its own. One of the younger researchers pointed to something strange on their monitors. The metal of the ship's hull was responding to the atmospheric changes, almost like it was breathing. Tiny droplets of water were forming and evaporating on its surface in rhythmic patterns. Nobody had seen anything like it before. The team worked through the night, documenting everything they could. They knew they were witnessing something extraordinary, but none of them could explain it. The scientist couldn't shake the feeling that they'd created something far more powerful than they'd intended, something that might not be entirely under their control. As the first rays of dawn began to filter through the facility's ventilation system, she made a crucial decision. They needed to understand what was happening before moving forward with any more construction. She drafted an urgent message to the project leaders, knowing that what she was about to report would change the course of the entire project. Little did she know, this was just the beginning. The nature-forged battleship was about to show them all just how powerful it really was, and how little they truly understood about the forces they were trying to control. The world as they knew it was about to change, starting right here in this underground chamber with a ship that seemed to have a mind of its own. The first signs that something wasn't right came during a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning. The construction workers at the naval facility had just started their shift when they noticed strange clouds forming directly above the building site. These weren't normal clouds. They appeared and disappeared within minutes, like someone was flicking a switch in the sky. One of the senior workers, who'd been in construction for over 20 years, couldn't shake off an uneasy feeling. He'd worked on military projects before, but this was different. The air felt charged, like just before a lightning strike, except this feeling never went away. He watched as his coffee cup on the break room table vibrated slightly, creating tiny ripples in his drink. The project's lead weather expert was called in to investigate. He'd spent decades studying atmospheric patterns, but what he saw in the data readings made him question everything he knew. The instruments showed impossible pressure changes, dropping and rising faster than any natural weather system could manage. It was as if the area around the ship had created its own microclimate. Word spread quickly through the facility. Workers started recording the strange events on their phones, videos of rain falling from clear skies and mist that formed perfect geometric patterns before vanishing. The security team had to work overtime just to make sure none of these videos leaked to the public. Everyone who worked there had signed strict confidentiality agreements, but it's hard to keep people quiet when they're seeing things that defy explanation. The head of security gathered everyone for an emergency meeting. The large conference room was packed, with people standing along the walls. Engineers, construction workers, and scientists all shared their observations. One maintenance worker described how he'd seen frost patterns forming on windows in the middle of summer. An electrician talked about static electricity so strong it made their tools stick to the walls. The weather expert brought up his latest findings on the big screen. The graphs showed wild fluctuations in temperature, humidity, and air pressure, all centered around the ship's construction site. But what really caught everyone's attention was the pattern. These weren't random changes. There was a rhythm to them, almost like a heartbeat. As the days went by, the phenomena grew stronger. The construction team had to stop work several times because of sudden, localized rainstorms that seemed to target specific areas of the site. They'd be working on one section of the ship and suddenly water would pour down, but only in a perfect circle about 10 feet wide. Step outside that circle and you'd be completely dry. The facility's instruments were going haywire. Brand new sensors had to be installed because the old ones couldn't handle the extreme readings they were detecting. The engineering team worked around the clock, trying to understand what was causing these disturbances. They checked and double-checked every system, but the ship's main power hadn't even been connected yet. One night, during a particularly intense series of weather events, the security cameras caught something extraordinary. The metal surface of the ship appeared to be responding to the atmospheric changes. Tiny ripples moved across its hull like waves on a pond. When they played back the footage in slow motion, they could see that these ripples predicted the weather changes, appearing just before each new phenomenon occurred. The facility director stayed late that night, alone in his office, reviewing all the reports. He had to decide whether to continue the project or shut it down. The ship was already pushing the boundaries of known science, but now it seemed to be pushing back. As he looked out his window at the massive structure below, a flash of lightning illuminated the ship's hull, and for a brief moment he could have sworn he saw the metal shimmer with an inner light. He reached for his phone, knowing he had to make some very important calls. The nature-forged battleship was supposed to be a weapon that could control the weather, but now it seemed the weather itself was responding to the ship's presence. Nobody had expected this, and nobody knew what it meant for the future of the project, or for the world. The day of the first power-up test arrived with a mix of excitement and nervous tension. The morning sky was unusually clear, without a single cloud in sight, perfect conditions for monitoring any weather changes the ship might cause. The test team had arrived before dawn, triple-checking every system and sensor. The facility buzzed with activity. In the control room, engineers sat at their stations, surrounded by walls of screens showing different readings and measurements. The chief engineer's hands hovered over the main control panel, waiting for the final go-ahead. They'd run this sequence 1,000 times in simulations, but this was different. This was real. All stations, report in, the test director called out over the intercom. One by one, each team confirmed they were ready. The medical team was standing by, just in case. Security had cleared a half-mile radius around the facility. Even the local weather station had been notified to expect possible atmospheric disturbances, though nobody had told them the real reason why. The countdown began. 10 minutes to power up. The atmosphere in the control room grew tenser with each passing minute. Someone's coffee cup rattled slightly on their desk, whether from nerves or something else, nobody could tell. The backup generators hummed steadily, ready to provide the massive amount of power needed for the initial startup. 5 minutes, the automated system announced. The chief engineer wiped his palms on his pants. Years of work had led to this moment. In the observation deck above, senior military officials leaned forward in their chairs, watching intently. This project had cost billions. They needed results. 1 minute. The room fell silent except for the beeping of monitors and the soft whir of cooling fans. Everyone held their breath. The chief engineer placed his hand on the activation switch, watching the final seconds tick down. Initiating power sequence, now. The moment they engaged the ship's core systems, everything changed. The clear sky above the facility transformed in seconds. Clouds appeared out of nowhere, swirling into a massive spiral directly overhead. The monitoring equipment erupted with alerts as readings shot off the charts. Power levels rising faster than predicted, someone called out. On the main screen, the energy graph climbed rapidly, well beyond their calculations. The ship's hull began to glow with a faint blue light, pulsing like a heartbeat. Then came the wind. It started as a gentle breeze but quickly grew stronger, circling the facility in a perfect vortex. Papers flew off desks and warning sirens began to blare. The chief engineer reached for the shutdown switch, but the test director grabbed his wrist. "Wait," he said, eyes fixed on the readings. "Something's happening." The ship wasn't just affecting the weather, it was creating patterns they'd never seen before. The clouds above had formed into perfect geometric shapes, spinning and morphing like a cosmic dance. Lightning crackled between them, but it was strange lightning, blue and purple, moving in slow motion across the sky. Inside the ship itself, instruments detected impossible readings. Temperature sensors showed hot and cold spots alternating in regular patterns. Humidity levels fluctuated wildly, creating miniature rainbows that shimmered through the chamber. "Sir," one of the younger engineers called out, voice shaking slightly. "The quantum field readings, they're off the scale. The ship isn't just manipulating weather, it's somehow affecting the basic properties of the atmosphere itself." The test director's face paled as he watched the data streaming across his screen. They had created something far more powerful than they'd intended, and now it was active, responding to commands in ways they hadn't programmed. The ship was displaying capabilities that shouldn't have been possible with current technology. As the chaos unfolded, a strange calm settled over the control room. They all knew they were witnessing something historic, the moment when humanity first truly touched the forces of nature. But with that realization came a creeping fear. Had they gone too far? Were there some powers that weren't meant to be controlled? The test continued for several more minutes, each moment bringing new surprises and challenges. Nobody spoke about shutting it down anymore. They couldn't if they wanted to. The ship had taken on a life of its own, and this was just the beginning. The effects of the Nature Forge's activation spread faster than anyone could have predicted. Within hours, weather stations across the region began reporting bizarre atmospheric readings. A local meteorologist was the first to notice something wasn't right when his radar showed storm patterns moving in perfect geometric shapes, something that never happens in nature. The military facility's phones started ringing nonstop. First, it was the nearby airport reporting that their instruments were showing impossible wind patterns. Then came calls from fishing boats describing waves that moved against the current and clouds that formed perfect circles in the sky. The control room staff struggled to keep up with the incoming reports while trying to understand what was happening with their own systems. "Look at this," one of the weather analysts said, pointing to his screen. He'd pulled up satellite images from the last 6 hours. The pictures showed a strange ripple effect spreading outward from the facility like dropping a stone in a pond. But instead of water, this was affecting the entire atmosphere. The facility director paced in his office, fielding calls from increasingly worried government officials. "No, sir, we didn't expect this scale of impact," he said into his phone for what felt like the 100th time. "Yes, sir, we're trying to contain it. But how do you contain something that affects the very air around us?" Down in the main chamber, the ship continued to pulse with that strange blue light. The engineering team worked frantically to understand what was happening. Their instruments showed that the vessel wasn't just affecting the weather, it was somehow changing the basic way air and water molecules behaved around it. A young technician rushed into the control room with fresh data printouts. "The effect is spreading exponentially," she reported, out of breath. "Weather patterns are destabilizing across the entire coastline. We're seeing temperature swings of 30 degrees in minutes, and the atmospheric pressure changes are unlike anything ever recorded." The military had already called an emergency meeting. In a secure conference room, officials watched video feeds from around the region. Farmers reported crops growing at impossible speeds where the strange weather patterns passed. Beachgoers had filmed waterspouts that froze mid-spin, creating towers of ice that stood for minutes before melting away. The facility's lead researcher couldn't hide his concern as he reviewed the latest data. The ship isn't just controlling weather anymore, he explained to the room full of worried faces. It's rewriting the rules of how weather works. These patterns we're seeing, they shouldn't be possible according to everything we know about meteorology. News helicopters circle the area, their cameras capturing stunning footage of the atmospheric disturbances. The public relations team scrambled to craft explanations, but how do you explain something you don't understand yourself? Social media was flooded with videos of the strange weather phenomena, and conspiracy theories were already spreading faster than the atmospheric changes. In the facility's break room, 2 security guards watched the local news with growing unease. The weather map behind the confused-looking forecaster showed storm systems moving in perfect squares across the region. Never seen anything like it in 20 years of forecasting, the meteorologist was saying, his voice filled with a mix of fear and amazement. The facility's environmental impact team rushed to complete their preliminary report. The findings were alarming. Fish were swimming in unusual patterns, birds were confused by the changing air pressures, and even plants were responding strangely to the altered atmosphere. It was as if the Nature Forge had created a new type of weather, one that didn't follow the natural laws they'd all taken for granted. As the sun set on that chaotic day, the facility director stood at his window, watching the unnaturally perfect clouds swirl overhead. The project was meant to give them control over the weather, but instead, it seemed to be revealing how little they truly understood about the forces they were trying to manipulate. And somewhere deep in the facility, the ship continued to pulse with that mysterious blue light, its influence spreading further with each passing hour. The top-secret facility had transformed into a hub of frantic activity. Scientists from around the world arrived in waves, each bringing their own theories about what was happening. The main conference room, usually pristine and orderly, now looked like a university library during finals week, whiteboards covered in complex equations, laptops displaying weather models, and empty coffee cups everywhere. The lead scientist hadn't slept in 2 days, but nobody could tell from the energy in her voice as she briefed the newly arrived experts. What we're seeing defies everything we know about weather patterns, she explained, pulling up the latest satellite images. The ship isn't just changing the weather, it's creating weather that shouldn't be possible. A quantum physicist from a prestigious research institute raised his hand. These readings, he said, pointing to a graph on his tablet, they remind me of quantum superposition, but on a massive scale. The room fell silent. Everyone knew what that meant. Somehow, the ship was making multiple weather patterns exist simultaneously, like Schrödinger's cat, but with storms instead of cats. In the lab next door, atmospheric scientists huddled around a 3D holographic display of the weather patterns. One of them, who'd studied storms for 30 years, shook his head in disbelief. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a perfectly hexagonal cloud formation. "Nature doesn't make shapes like this. It's as if the atmosphere is following new rules of physics." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A young researcher, who'd been analyzing data in the corner for hours, suddenly jumped up. "I think I understand," she exclaimed, rushing to the main screen. She pulled up 2 different data sets, one showing the ship's energy patterns, another showing the strange weather formations. The ship isn't just affecting our weather, it's connecting to weather patterns that exist in parallel quantum states. The facility director listened as the team explained their theory in simpler terms. Somehow, the Nature Forge had created bridges between different possible weather patterns, like doors between parallel worlds, each with its own version of the weather. That's why they were seeing impossible things. Multiple weather patterns were overlapping in the same space. Down in the engineering bay, technicians worked to modify their instruments. Regular weather equipment couldn't handle these readings. They needed new tools that could measure quantum weather states. One engineer had rigged up a modified quantum sensor using parts from 3 different machines. "It's not pretty," he admitted, "but it works." The international team grew larger by the hour. A climate expert from the Southern Hemisphere pointed out something fascinating. The quantum weather bridges were affecting global weather patterns, but not in the chaotic way they'd feared. Instead, it was creating a new kind of atmospheric harmony, though one that didn't follow any known rules of meteorology. In the facility's cafeteria, scientists from different fields shared theories over lukewarm coffee. A meteorologist drew diagrams on a napkin, while a quantum mathematician added equations in the margins. Despite their exhaustion, there was an undercurrent of excitement. They were witnessing something revolutionary, the birth of a new branch of science. The lead scientist gathered everyone for an evening briefing. The room was packed, with people sitting on tables and leaning against walls. "We're dealing with quantum weather," she announced, "a phenomenon that's never been observed before. The Nature Forge isn't just a weather control ship, it's a bridge between quantum weather states." As she explained their findings, a strange beauty emerged in the chaos. The ship hadn't malfunctioned, it had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest expectations. It had opened their eyes to a whole new dimension of weather, one where the lines between possible and impossible had blurred. Outside, the quantum weather continued its ethereal display. Perfect geometric clouds danced across the sky, while ribbons of rain fell upward into the heavens. The world was changing, and in that conference room full of tired but excited scientists, humanity was taking its first steps toward understanding how. The world changed faster than anyone could have predicted. Within weeks, farmers in the Midwest watched in disbelief as their crops cycled through entire growing seasons in days. The evening news showed footage of snow falling in the Sahara Desert, while the Arctic experienced a sudden burst of tropical weather. It wasn't chaos, it was something far stranger. One morning, a small-town weather forecaster in the Midwest stayed at his radar screen in confusion. The seasonal patterns he'd known his entire career had vanished, replaced by something entirely new. "Folks," he said during his live broadcast, his voice trembling slightly, "I've been predicting weather for 30 years, but I have to be honest, I don't know how to forecast this anymore." In Japan, rice farmers gathered in their fields, watching perfect circles of rain water their crops while the surrounding areas stayed completely dry. The quantum weather patterns had created microclimates that defied explanation. Some fields produce 3 harvests in a month, while others experience all 4 seasons simultaneously in different corners of the same plot. The global economy felt the impact immediately. Stock markets fluctuated wildly as investors tried to make sense of the new reality. Agricultural futures became impossible to predict. Insurance companies held emergency meetings, struggling to figure out how to handle claims in a world where multiple weather patterns could exist at once. A fishing village in Norway found itself at the center of international attention when their fjord began experiencing 5 different types of weather at once. Tourists flocked to see the phenomenon, snow falling on one boat while another basked in sunshine just 50 feet away. Local fishermen reported that the fish had changed their patterns too, moving in geometric formations never seen before. Back at the facility, the monitoring team worked round-the-clock shifts, tracking the spread of the quantum weather effects. "It's like watching a new kind of nature evolve," one analyst said, pointing to satellite imagery showing weather patterns moving in perfect fractals across continents. The media dubbed it the weather war, though no shots had been fired. Headlines screamed about the end of predictable seasons, while social media filled with videos of impossible weather phenomena. One particularly viral clip showed a rain shower that formed the shape of a double helix in the sky, spinning slowly while onlookers filmed in amazement. Agricultural experts huddled in emergency conferences, trying to understand what this meant for global food production. Some regions reported record harvests, while others struggled with rapidly changing conditions. Home gardeners shared stories online about tomato plants that grew overnight and trees that bloomed in winter. A group of schoolchildren in Brazil became internet famous after recording a weather phenomenon in their playground, a small cloud that followed them around, providing shade wherever they went. Scientists struggled to explain these localized weather events that seemed to respond to human presence. The pressure on world leaders mounted as the public demanded answers. How long would this last? Was this the new normal? Environmental activists clashed with supporters of the military project, their protests playing out under skies that rippled with quantum weather patterns. In a remote weather station in Antarctica, researchers documented the most striking evidence yet of the changed world. They recorded temperatures fluctuating between -40 and +20 degrees Celsius in perfect sine waves, each cycle lasting exactly 1 hour. The precision suggested something fundamental had changed in how Earth's atmosphere behaved. As the day ended in one time zone after another, people stepped outside to watch the sunset, or what used to be a simple sunset. Now the sky would transformed into a cascade of colors as multiple weather states overlapped, creating light shows that made the northern lights look tame in comparison. Amateur photographers shared millions of pictures online, each one stranger than the last. The nature-forged battleship, still pulsing with its mysterious blue light in the secret facility, had done more than control the weather. It had fundamentally changed humanity's relationship with the atmosphere itself. And somewhere in a secure conference room, world leaders were about to make decisions that would determine whether this change would be humanity's greatest achievement or its biggest mistake. The lead scientist stood before a room of world leaders, her hands steady despite the weight of what she was about to propose. The quantum weather situation had reached a critical point. On the screens behind her, satellite images showed weather patterns that looked more like computer circuits than natural phenomena. "We have a solution," she began, her voice clear and determined. "But I have to be honest, it's risky. We believe we can use the Nature-Forge's own technology to reset the atmospheric patterns. Think of it like rebooting a computer, but we're rebooting the Earth's weather systems." The room erupted in questions. One official stood up, his face red with concern. "And what happens if this reboot fails?" he demanded. The scientist took a deep breath before answering. "Then we could permanently destabilize Earth's climate system. But if we do nothing, the quantum weather patterns will continue to spread until our planet's atmosphere becomes completely unpredictable." Back in the facility's main lab, her team was already preparing for the attempt. Engineers modified the ship's systems, while quantum physicists ran simulation after simulation. One veteran technician worked through his third straight shift, fueled by coffee and determination. "My grandkids live on the coast," he explained to a colleague. "With these weather patterns, their home could be underwater next week or buried in snow. We have to fix this." The preparation was like nothing they'd ever attempted before. They needed to calculate the exact power levels that would collapse all quantum weather states back into a single natural pattern. Too much power, and they'd make things worse. Too little, and nothing would change. In the ship's main chamber, workers installed new equipment that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Quantum sensors covered every surface, their lights blinking in an endless dance of data collection. The ship's hull had changed too. The metal now rippled constantly, like waves on a pond, responding to the multiple weather states it had created. A young physicist found something surprising in the data. "Look at this," she called out, pointing to her screen. "The ship isn't just connecting to quantum weather states, it's creating a pattern. If we can understand this pattern, we can reverse it." The discovery brought new hope to the team. Maybe they weren't just shooting in the dark after all. The facility director organized a final briefing. The room was packed with scientists, military personnel, and government officials. "We get one shot at this," he explained. "The power requirements are so massive that we can only try once. After that, either the weather patterns will reset, or—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone knew the stakes. Outside the facility, the quantum weather had created a stunning but terrifying display. Multiple types of clouds swirled in impossible patterns, while lightning danced in slow motion through the air. Rain fell upward in one spot while snow fell sideways in another. It was beautiful, but it was wrong. Nature wasn't meant to work this way. The lead scientist walked through the facility one last time before the attempt. She stopped to talk with each team, checking preparations and offering encouragement. In the break room, she found a group of engineers sharing photos of their families. "This is why we do it," one said quietly, showing a picture of his children playing in what used to be normal weather. As final checks began, the atmosphere in the control room was tense but focused. Years of scientific training had led to this moment. Technicians moved with careful precision, double-checking every setting. The quantum physics team ran through their calculations one last time, knowing that even a tiny error could have catastrophic consequences. The plan was set. They would use the Nature-Forge's own quantum field generators to create a controlled collapse of all weather states back to their natural pattern. It was like trying to fold 1,000 sheets of paper back into a single sheet, Impossible by normal means, but maybe, just maybe, possible with the most advanced technology ever created. The control room buzzed with nervous energy as the final countdown began. Every screen showed different readings: power levels, atmospheric conditions, quantum state measurements. Outside, the sky had turned an otherworldly purple, as if nature itself knew something extraordinary was about to happen. All stations, report status, called out the mission director, her voice steady despite the pressure. One by one, each team responded. Power systems ready. Quantum field generators aligned. Weather monitoring active. Each confirmation brought them closer to the moment of truth. In the observation room above, government officials and military leaders watched in tense silence. One general nervously twisted his wedding ring, a habit his staff had never seen before. On his tablet, a message from his daughter blinked. "Good luck, Dad. Fix the sky for us." The lead scientist stood at her console, hands hovering over the controls. Years of research had led to this moment. "Beginning power-up sequence," she announced. The facility's massive generators roared to life, sending vibrations through the floor. Emergency lights cast everything in a reddish glow. A young technician monitored the quantum readings, his eyes widening. "The ship is responding faster than expected," he called out. "Field strength at 200% of predicted levels." On his screen, numbers climbed rapidly as the Nature Forge systems engaged with the quantum weather states. Outside, the effects were immediate and spectacular. The purple sky swelled like oil on water, forming perfect geometric patterns. Lightning bolts froze in mid-strike, creating a web of light that hung motionless in the air. Time itself seemed to slow down around the facility. "Power levels approaching critical threshold," announced the chief engineer, sweat visible on his forehead. The whole building hummed with energy. In the break room, coffee cups vibrated off tables. Security cameras showed maintenance crews rushing to keep backup generators from overheating. The lead scientist watched her main display intently. "We're seeing quantum state alignment," she reported. "The weather patterns are starting to converge." On the massive wall screen, satellite imagery showed the impossible weather formations beginning to pulse in sync like a global heartbeat. Hour 2 brought the first major challenge. Warning alarms blared as power fluctuations threatened to destabilize the process. "Rerouting power from sectors 3 and 4, shouted an engineer, his fingers flying over his keyboard. The facility's lights dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again. In the ship's main chamber, the quantum field had become visible to the naked eye, a shimmering curtain of energy that rippled through the air. The metal hull of the Nature Forge glowed with an intense blue light, brighter than ever before. Security cameras showed the light pulsing in perfect rhythm with the global weather patterns. By hour 48, exhaustion had set in. Staff worked in shifts, but nobody wanted to leave. They all knew they were witnessing something historic. A veteran meteorologist stared at his readings in amazement. "The quantum weather states are collapsing back into normal patterns," he announced. "It's actually working." The final hours were the most intense. The ship's energy output reached levels that shouldn't have been possible. Backup systems kicked in automatically as primary systems redlined. In the control room, engineers worked frantically to keep everything stable for just a little longer. 72 hours, someone called out. "Mark." The room held its breath. On the main screen, they watched as the last quantum weather patterns began to align. The purple sky slowly faded to a more natural blue. The frozen lightning dissolved into gentle rain. Nature was remembering how to be natural again. The lead scientist checked her final readings, then looked up at the anxious faces around her. A slow smile spread across her face. "Pattern convergence complete," she announced. "Weather systems are returning to normal parameters." The room erupted in cheers and tears of relief. As the sun set on that historic day, the sky was just a sky again, beautiful in its simplicity. The Nature Forge's blue glow finally dimmed, its incredible task complete. In homes around the world, people stepped outside to feel normal rain, normal wind, and watch normal clouds drift by. Something as simple as ordinary weather had never felt so extraordinary. The days following the successful reset of Earth's weather patterns were filled with both relief and reflection. In the facility's main conference room, now cluttered with empty coffee cups and scattered papers, the team gathered for their final briefing. The atmosphere was different now, quieter, more thoughtful. The lead scientist stood before Congress, her testimony broadcast worldwide. "The Nature Forge project taught us something profound," she explained, her voice carrying years of experience and new wisdom. "We created this ship to control nature, but in doing so, we discovered how little we truly understood about the forces we were trying to master." Down in the facility's massive chamber, workers began the careful process of decommissioning the ship. Its hull, once pulsing with otherworldly energy, now lay quiet and dark. One veteran engineer paused in his work, placing his hand on the cold metal surface. "Hard to believe this thing almost changed our world forever," he murmured to his colleague. The project's data filled thousands of secure servers. Young researchers pored over the readings, writing papers that would revolutionize multiple fields of science. "We thought we were building a weapon," one physicist commented while reviewing the data, "but what we really built was a window into nature's deepest secrets." In universities across the world, new courses were being created. Quantum weather theory became the hottest field of study. Students debated the implications of what had happened, their discussions filled with equal parts excitement and caution. The textbooks had to be rewritten. Nature had shown them new possibilities they never imagined. The facility director attended one final meeting with military officials. Their original dream of controlling weather as a weapon now seemed naive. "Some forces aren't meant to be weapons," he told them, sliding a folder across the table. "Our recommendation is to seal this technology away. We're not ready for it, not yet." Around the world, people began to appreciate normal weather in a new way. Farmers smiled at regular rain clouds. Children played in ordinary snow. The simple predictability of seasons felt like a gift. News channels slowly returned to standard weather forecasts, though some meteorologists admitted they sometimes missed the excitement of the quantum weather patterns. Back in the facility's archive room, technicians carefully stored away the project's blueprints. Each page was sealed in special containers, marked with warnings for future generations. "Think anyone will try this again?" one asked as they locked the vault. His supervisor shook her head. "Hopefully they'll be wiser than we were when they do." The lead scientist wrote her final report late one night, choosing her words carefully. "The Nature Forge project succeeded in ways we never intended," she typed. "We sought to control nature, but instead learned a lesson in humility. Some forces in our universe demand respect rather than control." Near the facility, a small garden had sprouted where some of the quantum weather effects had been strongest. Plants that grew in unusual patterns, a lasting reminder of what had happened. Local children made up stories about the garden, but the scientists who studied it knew it held important clues about nature's resilience and ability to adapt. The project team gradually dispersed to new assignments, but they kept in touch. They had shared something unprecedented, a glimpse into nature's deepest mysteries. During their farewell gathering, they shared stories and memories, but also made promises to remember what they'd learned about the responsibility that comes with scientific discovery. As the sun set on the facility one last time, the lead scientist stood at her office window. The sky was a simple, beautiful blue, with ordinary clouds drifting peacefully overhead. In her hand, she held a small piece of the ship's hull, its surface still marked with those strange patterns. It would serve as a reminder that sometimes the greatest discoveries come not from conquering nature, but from learning to understand and respect it.